Hello, and welcome to the Alchemists Inkwell.
This is your spiritual podcast for grounded people.
I'm Emily, and I also sound super nasally right now, so I apologize.
You sound gorgeous. And my name is KristaLyn,
Thank
and
you.
I might sound nasally all the time. I don't know. I used to be accused of a nasally singing voice, which I worked on. So welcome to the podcast. We also have a really special, amazing guest, and that is Rebekah Carmichael. And you may know Rebekah as Rebekah the Ghost Guide from TikTok. Rebekah, hi.
Hello. Oh my goodness. Can I just say, like, as a huge fan of this podcast, when I heard you do the opening, like in live time, I got the jitters because I was like, it's happening. Like, I'm a part of this today.
Oh my God, I love you so much.
Yeah, that's really nice to say. Thank you.
So tell us about yourself. Give
Yeah.
the listeners a little background on you.
All right. Well, calling myself Rebekah the Ghost Guide on TikTok and other various platforms, it was a title that came about because of the information that I was putting out there. I was talking about ghosts, and at the time, I know that there were other people out there talking about ghosts with a level of, should I say, humanity, though a lot of folks really took on to that, and they were like, wow, you talk about ghosts like they're people. And I was like, yeah, I do that. Glad it kind of surfaced. But as far as like who I am an open practice spiritual consultant, obviously a content creator, and I'm an open practitioner and spiritualist, aka I talk to spirit folks. So
That's
what
awesome.
I do.
Yeah,
I appreciate that is the definition of spiritualist you use. That makes me happy.
Yeah,
Like I talk to spirit folks. I love it.
I like how consciously you choose your words as well, like sticking with like open practice. I do this. I know, like, you've done your research and it shows. And I think that that's really, really cool for especially this world where, we say it's a spiritual podcast for grounded people. We're a spiritual podcast for people who are like, what's the answer? Or how do I find an answer? Or how do I explore this without getting lost in weeds? And you definitely shine as someone who has done that exploration.
Well, I super appreciate that acknowledgement because it is something I regularly want to bring attention to on my channel, but also in my personal life. It's something on my videos, if I am talking about a subject, you will find me regularly say, in my experience, my experience and what I have seen. It's always done with the understanding of I'm speaking from my experience, from what I've read, from who I've talked to, and from what I believe. And that's something that I regularly bring attention to with each individual that I talk with, as well as my platform. It's, hey, we can all have similar beliefs, and that's beautiful. Though the core of those beliefs ought to come from our personal beliefs and how those align with other people naturally, rather than adhering to something that, goes into what we're quote supposed to believe or what is quote right or that kind of thing. I think spiritual experience is personal every time, and I always want to honor that.
Yeah, I love that.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about your background. Like, obviously you've leaned towards the ghost side, but how did you start with this? How did you reawaken into it? What drew you to the ghost aspect of it? All the deets.
So, I didn't know I was having experiences for most of my life because I was caught up in this idea of mediums are, it's such a limiting belief. I hate even having to say it like this, but mediums are only physical eye clairvoyant and only physical ear clairaudience and, occasionally clairsentient. And because of that, I just thought, I would look at these shows. I remember old Travel Channel. When I was growing up, it wasn't all about ghost hunting. It was about ghost stories.
Yeah.
And I would watch these stories, and I love that they were steeped in history, and they talked about the sociology of a haunting and the people who had seen these things. And I thought that was so cool. And I remember watching these things and I was like, oh man, it'd be so cool to be able to connect with people like spirits like that. All the while I'd be watching it literally in my living room, and I'd be terrified to look over in this particular corner because of something that lived there. Now, I saw that something with inner eye clairvoyance. It wasn't always that way. Pretty much by the time I was 3, I had put I don't like calling it a block, I call it a shield, because I put it there. I didn't realize what I was doing at the time, but between the ages of 3 and 7, I locked off a lot of my more natural abilities that were coming because they were scary. And I was a part of a larger religion that didn't have answers. And yeah, I risked the potential of being ostracized for saying that I was seeing stuff, even though I was also having experiences with like my past loved ones and like my past pets and that kind of thing. Those were less scary, but fear really ruled out on a lot of things. And then life stuff happened. And it's interesting, my journey as someone who is spiritually sensitive, it would have these funny peaks around the times where I was going through a lot of funny, weird, potentially scary, not safe kinds of stuff. It's like when my guides were trying to communicate with me, which it was funny. I would just have these conversations that I thought were quote in my head and being like, yeah, there's, like this woman, she hangs out with me, I had different guides at different times in my life. And I'd just be like, yeah. Only until recently was I able to put that together and be like, oh, yeah, that's spirit guides. That's what that is. But I just did this kind of up and down of spiritual awareness, and a lot of it had to do with my mental health. A lot of it had to do with how well I was in my own body, where I was at the time. Was I running from things? Was I able to be present? That sort of thing. So my journey of coming back into spiritualism on a mediumship or psychic standpoint is entirely laced with my mental health journey. And it's just really all this came about. I started to just accept myself on a lot of levels. Like I started to love myself more. I started to accept myself more. I started to accept the weirdness of the day-to-day that is my life and the things that were going on. I tried to not sweat the small stuff. And go figure, that also started to help me reawaken a lot of the things that I had been running from spiritually for most of my life. Mm-hmm. And that all kind of culminated with me moving to Wilmington. Didn't know why I moved here. I'm in North Carolina, and it was one of those things where it just made absolute sense. I knew no one here. I showed up and I was like, yep, I'm going to move here. 2 weeks later, signed a lease, done and done. Little did I realize that there was a lot of destiny type things here in Wilmington for me. But all of that started with me getting on ghost tours. This is one of the most haunted areas in the United States South. And yeah, I would do these ghost tours and have these experiences supposedly in my head until finally I was like, ooh, yeah, I don't know if that's just in my head anymore. So yeah. It's been a trip.
Yeah. I love that you bring attention to watching things on the Travel Channel and feeling that like, oh, I wish I could do that. Because whenever people ask me like, oh, how do I know what if I have psychic abilities? Of course, obviously my stance is everybody has these abilities. Everyone can do this in some level. I always say, well, have you always wished you had them? Then you have them. You're drawn to them. You're magnetized towards them. And I think a lot of people's first exposure was like ghost story stuff, or like seeing different psychics on TV do gallery readings, or like go on talk shows or whatever and talk about spooky ghost things and being like, wow, that's so cool. Now, a lot of people, of course, equate that with like ghost hunting stuff, which is less high vibe, I think, than just the stirring of the stories. But I love that you call attention to that, because I think that's a really important and notable thing. Is a lot of people are like, oh, I wish I had this. I wish I could do what they're doing. And if it matters that much to you, you obviously have it. It's one of the easiest ways to notice. Yeah. And good on you for moving to Wilmington just because you knew you needed to.
So I already have access to your chart because you have provided the information ahead of time. And when you were talking about like, I just knew I was going to move there, I'm like, I got to look at the astrocartography here. It's your sun culminating line straight through. So, the generic interpretation over here was this is an ideal place for advancement in your professional, but also in a lot of traditional ways, the sun is the spirit. So in your spirit goals, that essence of who you are and what you came here to do, that's really cool that you showed up in this location. And it could be like vaguely in other like locations too, but it's pretty amazing how it goes right through. So good job picking up on that energy. Obviously, no one's surprised because you're so, talented and skillful, but it's really cool to be able to see that validation. I hope you don't mind.
No, not at all. Like, and I'll say too, the reason why I know you have that accessibility is because I took Forgotten Storyteller.
Yeah.
I'm happy to plug that for you and be like, yeah, it's a
Thank
great
you.
experience. Highly recommend. The book's coming out anyway. So
We can't wait to read it. First
Yeah.
of all, yeah, Rebekah was one of our Forgotten Storytellers, and it was great.
It was
And I
amazing.
can't wait to read the book.
yeah, it's exciting. This is like the third thing this week of quote randomness of being like, oh yeah, I'm in like final drafting stage and that kind of thing. So thanks for that. But yeah, it's funny you mentioned that call to Wilmington. And at the time, I was so spiritually closed off. I was in a place that felt like a lot of darkness in my life. It was very hard. I was very business minded, business overall. I was living to work, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
But the funny thing with Wilmington was when I came here, I got like, when I was vacationing here, we were here for like 2 days. I got so sick, and it was from E. coli that I had eaten something from where I had come from. And so I couldn't even go out at all. And I just sat there and pondered, like my poor dog, she's just like with me. I would go to the bathroom and she would follow me. And oh, that dog, oh my goodness, the things she heard, the things she saw while I was sick at that time. And of course, my partner was there too, but like she was the nanny dog. She's a pit bull, so like it's what she does. But I actually had to slow down and contemplate my life while I was terribly sick. And go figure, the last day that we were there, that was the first day that I was feeling better. And like I took a walk around the neighborhood. You have all these wonderful historic homes, so many vibes. And I was just like, okay, yep. I want to feel like this again, not sick, but I want to feel better. It's like the relief you feel after sickness. And there's just something about that. And Wilmington, I guess it's just a larger metaphor of me being here. So irony of things.
I love that.
Sort of like the energetic purge of where you came from into the healing of where you were going.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll say too, for anybody who's familiar with Rupert's story, it was also, quote, ironic that it was a kind of poison that actually was how he transitioned into spirit last time. So it was interesting to me. I was able to survive because, modern medicine, that sort of thing, Pedialyte and soup and that kind of thing, though he did not. And granted, while he didn't have E. coli specifically, the symptoms were incredibly similar. So it's like even more destiny, just being like, aha, get ready. Like you're going to share things with people and it's going to be wild.
So on that note with Rupert, so you have a lot of ghost friends that you introduce people to on your channel and in various different ways. Who was the first ghost you made friends with? Like, is there a story there?
So I would say it's important to say knowingly made friends with.
Yeah.
Knowingly made. That's reframe. Which ghost did you intend and have the choice to make friends with?
Yeah.
Which ghost did you make friends with? Maybe not the other way around.
Yeah. Because I'll mention, throughout my times growing up, I had the imaginary friends that, they're out there.
Sure.
But, at the time, you're told they're imaginary friends. And I was like, oh, okay, sure, okay. Don't know where these wild ideas they're telling me about comes from. But anyway, so knowingly befriended, I would say that started with, he called himself George. And he would hang out at the courthouse, found out later that he was a clerk. George was not his actual name. He was very hush-hush about a lot of the details of his life, because the more I found out, the more I realized he was not a very good person. And, perhaps he was hanging out there because, well, he felt like he had more power there than he would have on the other side, but that's another story. But I would say like true friends with, that would be, once again, another nickname, Jimothy. He is from Fort Fisher. He died in the Battle of Fort Fisher, the second one, in 1865. And he just wanted to see stuff. He just wanted to hang out and see the world. And my partner and I were living in a bus at the time. And we were like we talked with another friend of ours who was much more connected with her abilities. I should say acknowledging her abilities, because I was not acknowledging whatever was happening to me for the most part. And yeah, she was just like, hey, this guy wants to come hang out with you. And we kind of checked his vibe. And I have had extended conversations with him about the Civil War and his part in it. And he's grown very much on that extent as well. And a lot of the other guys down there have done the same thing. There's a lot of communication going on down there. Totally blows my mind, because there's this idea of ghosts that they're stuck in a time and that they can't grow and that they can't change their viewpoints on things. And I'm like, yeah, they can do that. You offer them more information, you offer them history, you offer them a larger understanding. If they want to be present and to retain that information, yes, they can work on themselves and do that. And once again, this is why I bring a lot of things back to mental health, because we're the same way. When we are super depressed and sad, it's hard to retain information. But the more we work on ourselves, the more we can retain information, the more we can grow. So it's like the journey of life can continue afterwards, and we can still be a part of it, which is cool. But yeah, Jimothy, he's super cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I love how approachable and human you make ghosts. I know that sounds so funny, but I mean, we've talked about it on here too. That's our experience as well, is like ghosts are very much just people. I mean, not all of them. Some of them are very much just shadows of self that do one thing over and over and over again, and they're stuck in that space because they're very small amounts of energy. But for the most part, they're their own beings. Not always people, but beings that exist and have the same emotional capacity and growth and all of that we do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I again love that there's no way anybody listening to this is like, oh yeah, Rebekah's making this up. There's no way.
I mean, they're welcome to, but I'm just like, okay, that's your journey.
Honestly, the details alone are great, but also the authenticity with the way that you're sharing and the tone that you're sharing and all of those things. As someone who is very much a skeptical person, even though I live in this world, I always am, very discerning about people when I approach them and hear their stories, because it's like, okay, what's the mental health state here? What's the respect state here? All of these things. And you are the most authentic and genuine kind of, I don't want to say purist, but like the most unconditional kind of energy that I've ever felt when someone's talking about this. Just saying like, you definitely have a really great way of accepting and seeing people in whatever phase of existence they're in, and just kind of bringing them into your story. I think that's cool.
My goodness. Thank you.
Yeah.
I've just been sitting here like, such kindness. I appreciate it.
Oh, I love that. So you did ghost tours. So tell us about that experience, because I feel like that's a lot of people's first actual touch or like run in with ghost energy is through a tour space. So how was that experience for you leading those tours? Being as intuitive as you are and not just someone who's like, this happened here. People have seen ghosts.
Yeah, it was like one of those things where the tour guides, they would have this joke that they always knew when I was coming up on a stop, or I was sharing a stop, or I had just left. And the reason why they knew is because the activity would just right up there. And I just thought it was funny, right? I, once again, not acknowledging my abilities and being like, oh, that's so funny. I was like, I guess it's just because I want to be nice to the ghosts. And I just, maybe they like my stories and stuff. Once again, totally not acknowledging that, I would roll up into different spots and like ping out like, hi, everybody, how are you doing? Yeah, I'm back. I would just be so excited. I would share that energy with them. And, if that's what would happen. To this day, I'll walk by some of the spots and I'll be like, hey, how are you doing? And they'll be like, oh, hey, Rebekah. And then you'll get like that one rando that's like, hey, oh, forgot your name. It's okay. Okay. Like that's, but the main thing was with the tour that I was a part of, the history of the actual stories was off. Now, did it make a good story? Yes. Though as a lover of history, and I love getting the facts on things, and it's something that I regularly do to check myself and test myself. I will find the history, I will find the accounts, talk to the people, that kind of thing. And I would be kind of irked by a few things. Like I would be telling these stories and, something in the back of my mind would be like, ooh, that's different. Or I don't know if it happened that way. And that would kind of lead me to do more research. But going back to the figure who called himself George, I would stand out in front of the courthouse and I would be telling a story. And then I would start getting mental imagery that contradicted what I was saying. And I would just, over time, I would be like, oh, this mental imagery is pretty interesting. Okay. And then I would just sort of put that into the story a little bit more, until finally the story that I was telling at that particular location was pretty different from what other guides were saying at that point. And it was actually to the thanks of a random spiritually sensitive person who was on my tour. And she didn't even want to say anything. It was actually her daughter who came up to me and she was like, hey, my mom wants to say something to you. She does this sometimes. We don't really get her. And finally, the mom comes up to me and she's like, the man that you tell about in your stories, the one at the courthouse. Yeah, he would really like to actually talk to you. Like he's been trying to talk to you for a while. It's like a ghost basically being like, we've been trying to reach you about your car's extended warranty. Essentially, he was trying to reach me to be like, I'm not just sending you this stuff because it's fun. I'm sending you this stuff because I want my narrative to be corrected.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how it started. And after that, I started going to different spots. Sometimes I'd show up before the tour and I would kind of catch vibes and I'd see if I could talk to the person that we were telling stories about. But that whole experience encouraged the humanity of what I was talking about, because not only, are you learning about that, it's also when they can hear you sometimes, and I think many times, that ought to change how you are talking about them. Like, it's like if you were talking about somebody and they were specifically standing right next to you, how you speak ought to change. So yeah, that's how it happened. And things just really grew from there. I started to acknowledging the ghosts that were in my very haunted house at the time. And that's what happened.
I really appreciate that. We have a lot of ghost tours out here because it's very Wild West. Like, there's mines everywhere. Like, it's very Wild West. And it always, every time I've ever gone on one, I'm like, you guys are jerks, because they like sensationalize the stories and the people and the ghosts and whatever. So I really love the bringing down of that into like, oh no, they're still here and listening to you. Like, this is a humanity thing, which is also the issue with like ghost adventures and things like that.
Yeah.
Which I know we've talked about before. That like poking them until they react thing is rude as shit. It's just so rude.
You wouldn't do that to someone that you could see with your eyes, or, like, this is just a sign of people who are not tuned in. But I also I like that you are choosing true history over history that is like scripted. Emily, that's something I know you know a lot about because you've been doing a lot of channeled history lately.
Yeah, super passionate about that too. So very, I love that energy. And it's hard when you can't find, and I know you probably empathize with this, when you can't find the exact history, when there's not records of it, because there's so many times, at least personally, like I'll come to a space and I do it, either there'll be a ghost there or I'll just be like, who lived here? Let me channel you in, as if they were a guide basically, but like call them in from like the ethereal. And they'll be like, this is what actually happened. And I'll be like, can I verify that? And they're like, probably not, but you can give it a shot. And it's, there is that level of it too. Sometimes it's like, okay, well, I'm going to trust what you said. You were here and lived it, even though this is not what any of the records say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's the cool thing about what we do. And I love that so much, because that's where a question that came up recently in one of my communities, they're just like, how do you know if what you're doing is right or real or whatever? And it's like, at some point, the belief has to come from the self, because we can try and find the history, and we absolutely should. We should pursue the psychology. We should pursue the science of all of this, though it needs to come from somewhere. And that starts from our own ability to connect. Yeah. So, and that's just where it goes. But it's also one of those things, sometimes I would get information and I would just be like, okay, there's no logical explanation on why that person says that they lived in this particular building.
Mm-hmm.
And letting it go and letting it be like, okay, well, I'm not going to beat myself up over that. Like, I don't really understand what that's about, but I'm just going to trust the process and hope I get an answer at some point. And that's it.
Yeah. And a
That's
lot
a
of the
big one,
times,
too.
like, you know, doing the research is really fun, first of all, because you have like this Indiana Jones kind of moment where you're like, I'm finding the uncovered truth here. When I did a tour with like John Zaffis at my college at one point. He helped Ed and Lorraine Warren with a lot like Annabelle and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And we were doing a lot of stuff, and I was still skeptical at the time because I wasn't even fully in confidence of my own abilities. So I was in a space with everybody kind of doing my own thing in the background while they were doing the gimmicky things. And I picked up on some stuff, and I went to my school's library and had to put on the gloves to go through all the old texts from the library. And what you find is like, maybe that event isn't recorded, but you find out like what was in the headlines at the time. What were the big political issues going on? And why would they maybe want to cover up this story? How does that maybe contrary to what the politics or the news or the, you know, popular opinion was meant to be? So people out there who are like, I do want to do more research on this, sometimes it's history between the lines that you have to look for. And you have to go outside of the scope of the moment that you're in and check out the culture and the tone of that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
History between the lines is a great way of putting it.
Yeah.
Especially if you're trying to tell the stories, or if you get pings of like minorities or women.
Mm-hmm.
It's nearly impossible to corroborate their story because they weren't written down.
Yep.
Ever, you know, and so it's a lot of history between the lines and sleuthing, and also like keeping them tuned in. I always do this when I'm doing research. I'm like, even if they're far away, because you can distance chat with someone. It's kind of like astral projection, but it's like consciousness projection. You can talk to someone and be like, okay, so here I am doing this research. Where were you during this piece? Like, explain this. Maybe that'll lead me over here. Or then they get really fiery sometimes, like, that's not how it happened. And you're like, okay, I appreciate that.
Sorry. Yeah. So speaking of like
you go.
misconceptions, right? Rebekah, what are some common misconceptions people have about ghosts, and what would you like them to know? Like people here to know about like correcting those misconceptions?
I would say first the humanity, which we've talked about a number of times. Even if you're dealing, and I know typically the concept of ghosts that we're talking about here are humans that lived and died, you know, but even though I think it's important to know, as we are living this human experience, to treat others sharing this plane of existence with our moral humanity kind of thing. So that's to start it off, to treat people with humanity. The other thing,
treat others the way you want to be treated, that whole golden rule thing. Yeah.
You know, what a concept. Another thing would be to allow them their free will. So this actually goes into something that I have been actively concerned about, seeing the whole, you know, the ghost hunting shows where the medium comes in and moves them on. Do they even get a say in that? Like what's even going on? What does move on mean? It matters. It means something different to every individual, depending on what they believe in, either here or in the afterlife or so-and-so. And the other thing is, with allowing them to be them, that allows them personality. Another thing that's been concerning for me is there's some folks out there who are talking about that if you ever channel somebody and it's like negative emotion, that's the channeler's ego, called an ego. Have you heard of this before?
I mean, not so much in those terms, I guess. Like, I've heard people be like, oh, you know, make sure that you're blank before you channel anything in so that you don't project your energy or whatever. But yeah, usually what I have heard of is when people are like, oh, they were having negative emotions, that's a negative entity and you need to get rid of them. That is like the quick jump, instead of being like, or maybe they're just upset that their house is turned into a coffee shop. Maybe that's something.
Yeah. It's basically there's a school of thought running around out there, and I don't know where the school of thought really comes from. It doesn't vibe with me. And I've meditated on it, and I've talked to my prospective folks about it, and it's a kind of rebranding of other religions and that kind of thing. But there's this concept that after one person passes, that there's only goodness and light and happiness, and there's nothing ever wrong, and there's no hurt or pain or anything like that. And I'm like, okay, how does that describe angry ghost? There's paranormal evidence, like in the paranormal investigation field, of ghosts who have feeling, and it's not always anger, but the whole spectrum of emotion. That's their humanity. And it's it I don't like this idea that there's a school of thought running around out there saying, oh, if they're angry, that's the reader's ego, that's the reader having their own blocks. And that robs people of feeling,
Mhm.
of being themselves. It makes everything look like it's some negative entity out there. And one of the things that I regularly come back to is spiritual compromise. And that doesn't always mean like compromising on one's own beliefs. That's a matter of, like, when I talk to people in consultations who have a ghost that is, quote, scary, say down in the basement, I'm like, okay, well, one, let's connect with them. And two, are they scary because they're confused? Do they know what's gone on? Do they know how they're projecting themselves? Is that an accident? Or are they scary because you don't understand what's going on, and that's scary to you because it's outside of your comfort? And so the compromise there is, sometimes I'll talk to ghosts and be like, hey, they said you don't have to go, but could you like not manifest as much around the kids? Like, could you offer some time, like when they're out during the daytime and stuff, like give them that space. And then at night, maybe not walk around too loudly. That would be super cool. That's the kind of compromise that I work with folks on, because for the most part, ghosts can live amongst us and not cause a fuss or have any problems. And honestly, they can help us, because many times they care about the places that we're inhabiting with them. I know a variety of stories where they do things like that, and they'll be like, oh, you left the oven on, so I, tripped you on your way out. And sure, there's like this, there can be an immediate kind of like, oh, why would you trip me? And then it's like, oh, wait, I wasn't paying attention and the oven's on.
Mhm.
So there can be compromise, there can be communication. And all of that goes back to us treating them with humanity, allowing them a free will to feel what they feel, and acknowledging that those feelings are valid. Once again, mental health stuff, just with spirit stuff. But yeah, I'm curious your thoughts on that, because I kind of went on like all of this and then going back kind of thing.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I guess
Yeah.
that's like my biggest thought. No, in my experience that too, it really bothers me, the idea that like when you see a ghost, you need to send them on right away, because that's like completely denying them their own free will. And oftentimes, they choose to stay back as a ghost. It's not because of lack of choice, which I think we have a like misconception that it's lack of choice that they're staying. Like part of them was left behind. Oh no, they need to go. Half the time it's like, well, no, I still had stuff to do, or this was still part of my life path. So I'm like staying, and part of me is staying behind and doing this. So yes, I fully agree and can corroborate that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that too. Like, I've encountered a lot of people who have confusion, and they're here figuring that out, or, they're here being helpful, or whatever is going on. And that's not my story to tell for them. Again, they have their reasons, and I don't need to pry. If there's a disturbance going on, or if someone's very unhappy, I've had energies come at me and get like all up in my face and angry about it. And I'm just like, listen, I know you're upset. And if you want to hang out here and work through that, you can. Do you know there's another option? Like, do you need help with that? Is this a stuck feeling for you? And if not, cool. Like, what do you need? It's like talking to a person, believe it or not, because you're talking to a person. And you wouldn't just like shove somebody out of their own house if they were having a problem, or even if they were just upset about something, or even if they were being unreasonable about something. There has to be an equilibrium one way or another. And if that person is missing information, you can offer the information. And then now that they have it, they get to make an informed decision, and you get to respect that. And that's been my experience. I will say, and I'm going to admit this, coming from the deep religious background. I used to have. Well, I used to be one of the people who were like, I'm going to go in and cleanse everything because if they're stuck here, blah, 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 blah. I didn't know how to do it, thank goodness. But there's been, there were moments where I had that sort of savior complex, which I'm not proud of. But if anybody else out there is listening and you were there too, guess what? You're probably not there anymore because you're listening to this podcast. So acknowledge your growth, appreciate how far you've come, and just know that there is growth there. Like it's possible. And that kind of brings me to this next question. I want to make sure we also have time for bookends. But this is a really great question. I think listeners are going to appreciate. You have a whole series on TikTok about things I wish I knew before my reawakening. What are the top 3 things you would recommend to listeners who are like, oh, I'm going through a reawakening right now and I'm feeling very without direction? Like hot 3 tips that you'd give to be like, hey, these are super helpful.
Yes. Okay. So just touching on what I mentioned earlier, physical eye clairvoyance and physical ear clairaudience are not the end all be all. There's so much more out there. And I know both of you talk about this, about all the clair abilities, senses, and I do as well. The other thing, I would say doubts don't have to be bad. I describe it like this in consultations, where when you tell a kid, don't put your hand on the stove, it's because the kid doesn't know the difference of if the stove is on or off. Like if they're too small to see it, they can't see it. So it's just better to be like, okay, just don't do that. So that in an extreme form is what helps them stay alive, right? It's something, doubts can help us stay alive in the sense that they keep us in our physical body. They tell us like, ooh, danger. Okay, we don't know the answer, so that could be dangerous. So, maybe not do that. Here's the thing, over time, one gets to reestablish what doubts benefit them and what doubts they no longer need to adhere to. So as people are opening up to their abilities, as I opened up to my abilities, I had to regularly ask myself, I'm like, okay, I have a doubt that I can do this. But where does that come from? Do I need that anymore? You talk oftentimes about limiting beliefs. So it's finding the balance and finding what that means for you, what's worth keeping. The other thing, as I went public about things that I could do, when I became more than a storyteller and I became the, person you could talk to and that kind of thing, I was reminded over the last few years the value of the friends that I have that see me for all of me. There were some folks that came, the expectancy of, you can do this, so you should, or, hey, we're friends, can you do this for me?
Yeah.
And I had to reevaluate what relationships were, what boundaries were, what mutual respect was. So with anybody who is good at something, doesn't matter if it's spirituality or not, there will be people who come and they just want that. They want that. So they just, well, why don't you? But you can do it, but why don't you?
Yeah.
And I found so much more value in those who we worked together to find the answers rather than one thing mooching off another. So I guess in summary of that point, take note of those who are closest to you, those who would accept you no matter what, and lean on them, ask them for help. Not a lot of healers know how to ask for help, and that's something I had to learn for myself too. So if there's a fourth one, I would say ask for help when you need it. Ask for support.
And be open when someone invites or offers help, even if you don't think you need it. Maybe they're offering for a reason, and you can explore that as well. It's a lesson I'm actually learning myself currently. So just putting it out there in case someone else is on the same journey.
Hey, me, I'm on that journey too. High five.
Hi.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah. So really quick, it is our bookend episode. So we did ask Rebekah before we hopped on if she would be okay also sharing the books that she's read this month, or is reading this month. So let's talk about our books really quick before we tell everyone where they can find you and all of that jazz. So Krista, you want to start? What'd you read this month?
So I read Legends and Lattes,
Good.
the D&D inspired, high fantasy with low stakes. It was really cute. There was a lot in it that was super refreshing. Having come from where we lived previously, we were running a coffee shop, so a lot of it was very familiar. And then they would like piece together, oh, this becomes a latte, and just watching them piece it together and be like, you're making a latte. Like I can see where this is going. Was really cool. It wasn't predictable. There was a lot of things where I was like, oh, this person seems annoying now, but maybe they'll get better later. And there was like some stuff I wanted that did happen. There was some stuff I was like, please don't do this typical trope thing. And they didn't. So that was great. I think for where my energy was, I would have appreciated maybe a few more stakes going on, which is why I dove into now Ninth House by Leah Bardugo. And so far so good, because there's a lot of like astrology stuff happening here. But I do think that this book has some of the traits of V.E. Schwab, where we're taking our mysteriousness a little too seriously. And I say this with a lot of Virgo in my chart. Like, you don't have to take your mysteriousness that seriously. We're picking up on it. It's fine. You can not drop 10 names that aren't going to come up until the third act, and just drop one and then kind of fill me in. That'd be great. So I do feel kind of left out of the narrative, even though the story's really interesting. It's really well told. I just don't feel like I'm along for the ride. I feel like someone's pushing me away from the story as I'm trying to absorb it, but I'm sticking with it because I do want to know what happens next. So we'll see how it goes.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Rebekah, what have you been reading?
So glad you prepped me for this question. I am reading / listening to the audiobook Mythos by Stephen Fry. He wrote it
right here.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So and he does a wonderful job of reading it as well. Very entertaining, of course. And it's been so validating for me because I didn't know really about gods, etc., like other deities and that sort of thing really until a few years ago. And I've been channeling a lot of energy just for myself and to grow and that kind of thing. And here I am, like, looking at this book, and it's a lot of like bite-sized information on Hellenistic deities. And it's been so validating because I'll be like, oh yeah, I get this vibe about this particular deity or god. And then he'll tell the story about them and talk about their personality and stuff. And I'll just be like, oh, okay, this is the validation I didn't know that I needed. Like, I wasn't entirely off. So it's been cool too to hear. It's something about the spoken language, especially when talking about these ancient deities who are still very much here. And I've just been like fanning about it the whole time because I'm just like, oh yeah, they're talking about, like, when they talk about Hermes, I'm like, oh, Hermes is okay. Like,
it's one of the best parts of the whole thing. And the audiobook is the way to go, because hearing Stephen Fry wrote it, which is beautiful in and of itself, but hearing him read it, such a great experience. I love that.
Interesting. Coming from a Hellenic polytheistic background, love it. Good job. Read it. Yeah. So good. Also, I have not read Ninth House, but I loved Legends and Lattes. He's doing a prequel that comes out this fall, and I am so excited for it.
Oh, that should be fun.
He announced it like 2 weeks ago. I'm very, very excited. Okay, what did I read this month? What did I read? Oh, okay. So I read the second book in the Fate of Wrath and Flame trilogy. It's I hate the name. Let me just throw this out there. I hate that everything has to be named a something of something and something. Like, why? But it's a really, really good, it's one of the best fantasy, like high fantasy series I've read in a really long time. So I highly recommend it. It's by K.A. Tucker, and it was the second book is another something of something and something. I don't know. I forget the name of it, but it's really good. So I highly recommend that. And then I read, what else did I read? Oh, I'm almost done with Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, and I've been thinking about you, Krista, the entire time because it is fairies the way you want fairies to be done.
Yes. Because we've had this discussion.
Yes. It reads like a research journal. So basically it's her notes as she is one of the foremost professors of dryadology that exists in the world, and she is creating an encyclopedia of all the fairies in Europe. And so she is traveling around, and she is in the most northernmost country, like on this island, trying to find the hidden ones. And it's really well done, and I really, really like it. And I've thought of you the entire time about
Amazing.
it.
I can't wait. I'm definitely going to read it.
Yes. And then I finished, I think that this was this month, The Mysteries of Thorn Manor which is just a novella that accompanies A Sorcery of Thorns, which is one of my all-time favorite books about a librarian of a library of all grimoires that try to eat you. Yeah, and it's like a little companion to that. It's really cute. So I finished that as well. I think that's all I read this month. So yeah, very fun. It's a short month too. So yeah, but Rebekah, thank you so much for joining us. We could talk to you forever, but for the sake of time, do tell everyone how they can find you and what you offer.
Yes, so thanks for having me. As I said, I'm a big fan of the podcast, talk about it all the time. And if you are looking for me, you will find me at Rebekah the Ghost Guide. That's Rebekah, the Ghost Guide. I am on TikTok. I am on YouTube. I am teaching courses on Patreon, as well as there's a bunch of cool merch that's there as well. And also doing exclusive ghost tours on there as well. And so, yeah, also Instagram, Facebook, wherever your social media may be found. I am Rebekah the Ghost Guide.
Yay.
Yes, you are.
And your book will be coming out soon. So
yeah, we'll be sure to let everybody
that.
know about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
But we love you and appreciate you. Thank you so much for being here. To our audience, if there's anyone you'd like us to interview, please let us know either in comments or shoot us an email, forgottenstorytellers@gmail.com. Of course, we also have Patreon. You can join us there, ask us questions, vote on episode topics, all of that fun stuff. Thank you all so much for listening, and we hope that you go this week and go make some magic. That was not good.
It was perfect on my side. I'm telling you. And you do this thing where you're like 1, 2, 3 point, and I don't know if we're going on 3 or point anymore. So we're gonna have to calibrate
because I've been waiting because we're not matching up, and so I'm like,
right. So you're waiting for me and pointing when I'm not speaking, and I'm going when you're pointing at me.
Yes.
We figured it out, you guys. Try again next week.
Okay, bye.